had the appearance of kind of like tentacles or like spider legs, and it was kind of hovering and slowly vibrating and watching me. And it was telepathically saying, "Oh, I'm attached to you. You'll never be free of me." There was like a fearful emanation coming off of it towards me that was putting me into like a fight or flight mode. When we understand how the dynamics of these things work, then the fear and the superstition can go away and we can be really empowered. And if we ever have to see or sense these things, we can know what to do.
Amanda Wideman, welcome back a third time. Thank you so much for being here. And today we're going to be talking about negative entities which you have experience with. So I'm excited to get into this with you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me back.
With negative entities, are they even real? And do you have experiences with them?
Yes, and yes. So let's jump right in. First, I'm going to say they're real. We'll talk about that throughout this conversation, but I will start with some of my own experiences. There's been quite a few, so it's been a bit of a learning curve. But when I was young, I would say about 3 years old, I was very much open to the spiritual world. I struggled because I'd have nightmares sometimes. And when I would wake up from the nightmare, I could still see beings in my room and they frightened me. I didn't understand what I was seeing. And I was growing up in I would say, like the Christian church, dogmatic Christianity. And so everything that we learned about, spirits is usually centered around demons and evil spirits. So I really struggled. I didn't talk to my family about it because I was really worried that I would frighten them. It was a very frightening experience. Then I stopped seeing these things, but as I got older, up until about the age, I don't know, 6 or 7, I would sense presences. So I wouldn't actually see like the appearance or the shape of anything, but I would walk into a room. It often happened actually in a certain old age nursing home where I would be somewhere and I would have the exact same chilling sensation that I wasn't alone, that I was being watched. It was very obvious in certain places. And again, I didn't talk about it to anyone. After age 7, I just kind of grew up like a regular person. I was always highly sensitive. But as far as the spiritual world, I wasn't sensing into anything. And then fast forward to after I had my near death experience at age 35, I became quite wide open again and started to remember many of these things. So if you had asked me when I was like 34, have you ever seen spirits or experienced the spiritual world? I had really blocked it out and all these memories came back. And so that's something that I had to really process through with some really helpful healers and guides for many years. And I'm still learning. I'm still a student of these things. So being quite wide open to the spiritual world after the near-death experience has been a blessing in many ways to have had communications and contact with higher dimension spirits and angels. But that opening typically makes a person kind of aware of the whole spectrum. So I've had experiences in the last 7 years where, and they usually happen in the middle of the night if I am suddenly awoken or just between sleeping and waking up, where I'm just slowly coming back into my body from being in the dream world and I can sense a presence in my room. It's happened a handful of times and it's initially quite shocking. It's initially quite shocking. And because you're just kind of waking up and you're a bit woozy, not feeling really grounded or resourced or have a plan or know what to do. And so only a couple of times have I actually seen a visual. Those were the most challenging and disturbing ones for me, part of my learning curve. Other times I've just really felt presence. For example, the first time since my near-death experience where I saw something, I had just been traveling. A few chaotic things had happened. I ended up being in an Airbnb in a location that wasn't planned, and so my own life was kind of all over the place. I wasn't grounded. So this probably contributed. And I remember waking up early in the morning and feeling kind of like a chill in my being, like I was being watched or I wasn't alone. And I'd probably been somewhere in the dream world, in the astral world, where I'd been kind of in the same dimension as the being that I could still see in my room. And, it had the appearance of kind of like tentacles or like spider legs, and it was kind of hovering and kind of slowly vibrating and watching me. And it was telepathically saying, like, oh, I'm attached to you. You'll never be free of me. There was like a kind of like a fearful emanation coming off of it towards me that was putting me into like a fight or flight mode. And different than being, in the physical world and being shocked, because at least you know how it works in the physical world. But when it's interdimensional and you're not trained, it can be quite shocking because you really don't know. So I've had other experiences like that since. There's a handful. I could tell you a bunch of stories, but that's kind of like a roundabout report of how it's been. For me, it's usually been in the night. And then the second part of your question, are they real? Yeah, definitely. I'm going to refer to some of the notes that I made before the call throughout this. But one of my teachers, Kat Courtney, said they don't care if you believe in them or not. So it's kind of like you don't have to believe that they're real. They still do exist, and many people experience or see them. They don't take a physical form, although they can kind of, depending on the type of negative entity, kind of hover in a certain person's field and be attached to that person's energy field. And yeah, I would say that it's not like the Hollywood caricatures or the horror movies that people see. In real life, people who do experience these kind of things, it's not in that superstitious way with like the crazy drawings. It's not how many of us who grew up in fundamental Christianity had it to believe, where we're kind of like, at the whim of these dark spirits that could come jump out from behind a rock anytime, and we should be frightened and give children nightmares. That's not how it is. And when we understand how the dynamics of these things work, the type of reality we're in, and just know the truth of it and have some knowledge, then a lot of the fear and the superstition can go away and we can be really empowered. And if we ever have to see or sense these things, we can know what to do, because we weren't brought up with that kind of training, especially the hypersensitives and the mystics. So just a few things about them. They are kind of like behind the scenes invisible forces that like to hang out in the energy field of traumatized human beings. If I had to kind of like bring it down to the basics, that's where they hang out. That's who is susceptible. Traumatized people that aren't healed and that are unsupported. Bob McCransky makes a great statement. They are like the machines pulling the strings in the matrix, working like germs, parasites, or opportunists. And so when we think of these kind of beings as parasites or opportunists, and not these scary monsters that are just going to like overtake us anytime, kind of puts it in a better perspective, because when it comes to germs or parasites, there's usually things that we can do about that and we can feel empowered. The other great way of looking at it is if you've ever encountered a narcissistic individual, somebody who's very manipulative and controlling and feeds off other people like an energy vampire. Kind of like attracts like, or as above, so below. If we understand how a human narcissist works, we can understand how a spiritual narcissist or a negative entity works. And in day-to-day life, we know like a narcissist really only exists when there's a wounded inner child. When we're kind of like codependent, we need a toxic person in our life and feel safer when we're in that kind of field. But once we're healed and we empower ourselves and step forward, we don't find that narcissists are really in our life. We don't attract these kind of manipulative people anymore. And so it's kind of the same way with negative entities. It doesn't mean you'll never have an experience with one, but the more healed and empowered you are, the less likely, because your field is strong and your field is heart open and empowered and not fearful and independent, really, as an individuated person. And those kind of parasites, germs in the spiritual world, they're going to be more attracted to someone who's vulnerable, who has kind of like little holes or tears in their energy field.
Mm.
And then those are the people that will have to deal with them. So they're kind of like, yeah, opportunists in that way. But yeah, not something to be afraid of. And again, like we have this idea from Hollywood or church or any of the things that we hear that these like demons are out there, like hiding behind something. But the truth is, these are like our inner demons, our inner unhealed wounds personified. And so that's why we have to learn how to kind of take responsibility for, those inner monsters that we have, where sometimes we don't want to look, we don't want to kind of address these things. But again, like attracts like. So we're going to kind of like attract people, invisible forces in the universe towards us that are resonant, that are just kind of like on the same wavelength as we are. So, even if someone doesn't watch this video all the way through, remember your sovereignty. Teacher Gigi Young says, you can come home to the heart anytime. And by facing our fears, facing our unhealed wounds, we rise and we're no longer a match. There's many things that we can do if we're like in a really bad situation where we feel we're kind of like followed around or dogged by these things. It can actually be like a spiritual initiation. It can be some people's greatest turning point to actually go through the process of facing these things, or being empowered to have them move out of the field as they heal. So some people, even though it can be quite frightening at that time, once you do get resourced, you can become quite a force to be reckoned with as far as your vibration and your energetic field. Yeah, so they're not like tricking us and just hanging around. It's really like what is a match to like what is unhealed inside of us.
Okay, so you're really saying that they're nothing to be scared of, and we have actually the power to control them.
Yeah, we have the power. We have the power to, if we have them in our field. And I would say, like personally, the types of negative entities that were kind of hanging around me or that have showed up in my psychic vision in the middle of the night and scared the heck out of me, they were on the same wavelength as parts of me that I hadn't dealt with, specifically fear, and definitely fears from my early life, going to Christian church and hearing about hell and seeing like pictures and paintings about hell. And some of these things were part of my personal story that I grew up with, having these fears of the unknown, fears of the spiritual world, and feeling very disempowered because of it. I believe that highly sensitive spiritual people are actually incredible creators because we can visualize and we can create. So a young child that's afraid of hell, who's highly sensitive and empathic and connected, is actually creating more of a stir, more of a whirlwind of what already exists around us. And then we're just kind of like attracting that kind of parasite. So I was someone who attracted a lot of the fear parasites because of my kind of like low-lying anxiety and the stories that I'd been told. So I would say, no, they're not things to be afraid of. They're things to get yourself knowledgeable and educated about, so that if you ever do encounter them, then you are that force to be reckoned with, and it's a very temporary situation, and hopefully a learning situation too. And with that fear thing, it would go with anything, like an addicted person, someone who's got a drug addiction or any other kind of addiction. They would have kind of like the energy of addiction already going on and unhealed in their field. So they're going to get more people, more humans, and then more spiritual forces that are invisible that kind of resonate with addiction. And it just feeds and feeds and feeds.
Well, that makes so much sense because, we attract different people in our lives that are similar to us, but that also means that we attract non-physical entities that are similar to us and what we are emanating and what vibration we are at. Wow, it makes so much sense. But what do you do when you're in that situation? Like, for example, when you woke up and there was this demon, and he was saying that, oh, I'm attached to you and you're not going to get away from me. What do you do then?
Yeah, again, huge learning curve. So I've gone so from like the 3-year-old and like literally wetting my bed, like literally, to the period of time just after my near-death experience when I was like really getting a lot of these situations. I intuitively just started praying to Christ. So the first times it happened in my 30s, I started calling on the name of Christ. I'd always heard that um, that is the one word, that is the one beingness, the one vibration that absolutely is like a law in the universe that, they don't want to be around that. So if a person is kind of finding themselves in a situation like me where they're very shocked, it's normal and it's okay to be shocked. What we don't want to do is go down the rabbit hole of fear and helplessness. So that initial shock is like, okay, this is what's going on. And then the next moment that a person can, there are so many things to do. So some of the things that I have done, number one, call on the name of Christ, and not in, I want to say like aside, not in a religious dogmatic way, but the beingness of Christ, the creative energy of the universe that within Jesus, that's what we're calling on. It's always available to us and it's very powerful and it's of a high vibration of the heart. Another thing that I had learned a little later on was really focusing on the heart center, creating, if possible, a warm, dynamic vibration in the heart, imagining kind of like a soft, pillowy glow coming from my heart center, because that vibration is not on the level of any kind of negative entity. They don't want to be around that. It's repulsive to them. And then, pull up my notes here. Changing the vibration of your space. For me personally, I sing. There are certain protective songs that I sing that the words and the vibration of the tune of the song, they've been sung many, many times in the shamanic tradition that I'm part of. And singing them, even if my voice is shaking, singing them over and over until actually the vibration of the room changes. So we have to also take that stance that even if we're frightened in the moment, we actually are superior. These kind of beings, they're actually kind of behind us. They're kind of like stragglers. It's kind of like if you think of like a really tasty meal, the germs and the parasites that we kind of collect after a couple of days, they're kind of like inferior. The meal in its like best, in its best moment when it was just cooked or whatever, that is kind of like what we are going back to. We're going to that freshness. So you just knowing that you as a holy human being can call on the power of Christ, can change the vibration of your room, can stand up, like even it's more for yourself than anything else, but literally standing up in like a confident posture and just being in your space because your space belongs to you. So these are kind of like my own go-tos if I find myself in that situation. But as far as like long term, we want to be asking ourselves like, okay, what part of my life was vulnerable to this event? So after the fact, once you're grounded, maybe when you're like working with a coach or a guide or whatever, getting really curious about like, what was their door? What door did I leave open? We hear a lot in different traditions about casting out demons, this kind of thing, like where is the place for that? Well, the truth is that does work. There are priests and pastors that do that, but if a person is not giving up that vulnerability and is not healing that part of them that attracted it, it's like the door's still wide open. So they might get relief for a little while. The energy and the vibration of their field changes because of the exorcism, but that thing's just going to make its way back in eventually. So yes, there's a time and a place for that. Working with a really good healer also. There's a few people I know that do what is called extraction. So they can actually see, they have the gift of being able to see what's in a person's energy field and then help remove it, but then actually work with the person after the fact on healing that part that was vulnerable. So that's kind of like more like a long-term solution in my opinion.
Right. Okay. So you're saying that like these exorcisms can be sort of a short-term thing, and it's like slapping a band-aid on a deeper wound. And in order to actually solve the problem, you have to go to the source, and that the source is what thing in them is attracting that entity to them.
100%. Yeah.
Okay. But also, you talked about, there are things that we can do in the face of that situation, like calling on the name of Christ and singing and imagining that your heart space is glowing. But what happens if in the moment you're completely freaked out? And I can imagine totally that just like runs out of your head. You're not doing that. What if you do the opposite? What if you let that fear consume you? What happens then? Could they possess you?
No. So that's a great question, because I would say pretty much anyone who is who has had an experience like that probably has another one, and probably has another one. Because if it's going to come once and it's not dealt with, it's probably going to come back and come back. In my situation, it was a really tough learning curve. I did what you said. I was the person who did become shocked, but also fearful, and kind of went down the fear rabbit hole and kind of identified as a victim. And there's nothing wrong with that. I feel like that's probably the majority of people's kind of like trajectory. So if that has happened to a person, there should be no shame in that, because it is a very frightening situation. The good news is it'll probably happen again. And then you're going to have hopefully collected a bit of resources by the next time. So not to have any shame about being fearful or being in shock, but to be like, okay, if that happens again in my life, if I'm in that unfortunate moment, next time I'm going to be resourced. And I'll be honest, even your next time when you are resourced, you can be really scared, and you can get really frozen, and you can get really confused. But every single time this has happened, and it's been many times that's happened with me, I'm jumping into my resources quicker. I'm jumping into those things faster, because eventually, I don't want to, this sounds bad, you kind of get used to it, and then you're like, I haven't gained anything from going into that fear hole. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try that. And as a result, every time you practice that, you're building resilience in your energy field. So not only are you probably going to have them come less because you got a little more resourced every time, it's actually kind of like a non-event. It's like, oh, I feel a strange presence. Interesting. Okay, now I'm going to, there's obviously probably some cases out there that are a lot more invasive. The person's way more traumatized than I was, and that's definitely always a job, I would say, again, for a healer or someone who specializes in that. But for regular people that are kind of having something more like me, it's literally about being okay with yourself, not feeling like a failure, and then next time seeing how fast you can get to your resource.
I've also heard that negative entities, they are in the fourth dimension. Is it true that they're in a different dimension than we are? And if it is, how do they get there?
Awesome. Super question. Super. Okay. So there are a few layers of this, so bear with me. They are definitely in the fourth dimension. Other words for that would be the lower astral plane. In some Western esoteric traditions, it's called the moon sphere or the eighth sphere. This is an invisible realm it's right here with us, but we don't see with our physical eyes. And, some people have psychic vision and they can kind of see symbols and happenings there. For the most part, you don't see it. And it's made up basically of unprocessed thought forms, thoughts that people have kind of allowed to linger. Maybe they've sat there and they've been bitter, ruminated, all kinds of stuff, and then gone on with their day. But thoughts are things, thoughts are energy, and they can kind of like take on a life of their own if they're thought many, many times. And I heard this a long time ago and it frightened me, like, oh, a random thought is going to create, no random thought is just going to create a negative entity. It's more the ones that you go back to and that you
Huh.
ruminate on, and they kind of like almost like over time, thoughts that are repeated, especially negative ones, they become things, not overnight. It's over a long period of time. So no one needs to be afraid. But again, this goes back to being a healed person. A healed person is not going to be thinking the same negative things over and over and over. That's why our
Hmm.
healing and shadow work is so important. Um, so yeah, it's basically like the realm of nightmares. Anyone who's had a nightmare, you were having an experience in the fourth dimension or the lower astral plane. Um, it's it's a dimension known for fear, separation, um, kind of like the lower ego. And it's closely related to the physical realm because ideas and thoughts that we have, manifestations that we're working on, or whatever, they start with a thought, or a word, or something like that. And so they can take time to kind of like form, and then there'll be some kind of reflection eventually in the physical world if it's got some traction. The fourth dimension also encompasses like our collective unconscious. So, if I'm going to have like a jealous thought over and over, I'm not the only one. There's other human beings that have like the same vibration of jealous thoughts. So there's almost like these forces that are like larger than life that exist in the fourth dimension. So you could say there's kind of like a force of jealousy that is as humans, our collective jealousy. And people can, if they're really unhealed and they really don't believe in a higher power, they can almost become possessed. And I don't mean possessed like in Hollywood, but just like super influenced without realizing it, super influenced by some of our collective unconscious creations. And we see that in, dangerous people and all kind of that kind of stuff. So they're thought forms, and usually what makes them very real is they're backed up by an emotion. So if I just think, if I create a monster right now in my head, but I'm just kind of flat about it, it's probably not going to create anything. But again, back to like jealousy, there's a lot of emotion behind that. So that's going to be a powerful force of creation. And just remembering that when we create good things too, it's good to have the good feelings because that puts a lot of momentum, and it's all happening in the lower astral realm. So some of those thought forms are thought forms we've had over and over, but we've pushed them so deep we might maybe not even thinking of them consciously. People who are doing unhealthy things, saying unhealthy things, if you kind of called them out on it, they might be like, oh, so these are sometimes like unconscious patterns that we're thinking. And yeah, the nature of that negative entity really depends on the nature of the thought form. And what else about the lower astral? Um, yeah, like seeing it in your psychic vision, in your third eye, it can look like a hell. I'll be honest, like the symbols, the kind of like character of the place. Some people see sadness or agony or like kind of like garbage dump kind of stuff. It's not that the lower astral is actually filled with those things, but when we sense a force, when we sense a negative force, our mind, our brain will put a picture to it to help us to understand. So if you and I were both looking at the same spot of the fourth dimension, we might actually see something a little different, but it's just the quality of the forces that are there and that our mind creates a picture to understand it.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so there are low vibrational entities associated with unresolved issues, unhealed karma, things that groups of humans together fear, and yeah, I guess like just unhealthy attachments in general.
So negative entities are thought forms, but
They
could
start
they
as thought forms.
they start as thought forms? Okay, but could they also be people? Because I've heard that when people they die and then they don't pass over to the other side. Is there truth to that? So could they actually be humans? Yeah, that haven't passed over.
Yeah, and this is a complicated one because it's like, okay, well, we hear all these different timelines and stories of what happens to us after we die. And the truth is, When a person dies, their soul, the part of them that is divinity, that we all share, like we all have a soul. The deepest part of a person's soul goes from life to life, but there are happenings, patterns that that person had that they didn't resolve. So many of us, knowingly or unknowingly, have parts of our own ancestors that are kind of like hanging around our field. They're not harming us. They're not. But when you start to become aware of them, I'll give you an example. I have a deceased ancestor, and I wasn't aware that a part of her that was unhealed, just part of her energy, really, not the true soul of her, was kind of in my field. I'd heard a couple psychic mediums say to me, "Oh, you've got a kind of like a dead person. Do you notice that in your field?" And I couldn't at the time. And that means if you're not noticing, it's not to worry. It's not time to deal with it. It's not probably dangerous, any of those things. But when I first started to notice that part of her, it wasn't the real personality of her. It was her misery, which was really interesting. So I was going through a period of time where I was really feeling sorry for myself and feeling miserable. And I started to see in my mind's eye this deceased ancestor of mine who was a very miserable person a lot of the time.
Hmm.
And I realized that it was her influence. It was a part of her that was unhealed and not crossed over, that was lingering with me. It has to go somewhere. So it was in kind of the fourth dimension or the lower astral plane, but around me. And that showed me that I really needed to deal with misery and how I was being a victim of certain misery in my own life if I wanted to get clear of that. So instead of blaming it on the dead person, back to like attracts like, we are seeing what part of us is a match for that. And when that's cleared up, when I'm no longer going down the road of a pity party and misery, she is not present. It's impossible. And on the good side, we can actually heal our ancestors or a part of a dead person's energy pattern that's in our field by healing it ourselves. We're literally canceling it out and dissolving it.
Okay, that's really cool to hear, and I also like that you specified that it wasn't her soul that stayed over, it was just a part of her energy, and we truly never die. So the part of our true soul does go to heaven or the afterlife, but it's just that energy doesn't have a place to go because it's vibrating at such a low frequency. It can't go where she is going because it's such an incredible high frequency. So it stays in the fourth dimension.
Yes, exactly. It stays in
Okay.
the fourth dimension until somebody to get in someone's face.
Yeah.
So that's why people who are hypersensitive, people on a spiritual path, it sometimes seems like all the bad things, all the struggles happen to those people. But the truth is, it should be almost like a congratulations. You're able to sense unhealed bits in our group unconscious. And when we take on those things instead of run away from them, when we're like, okay, I'm going to face this because it's part of me too, then we can start like literally canceling it out. And then I'm not going to spread it. If I have a kid, you know, I'm not going to pass that on to the next person in line. It's finished.
Yeah, and when you talk about the collective unconscious, that makes me think of how a lot of people are saying that the Earth's frequency is rising. And so that would make me assume that the vibration of the collective unconscious is rising as well. So would it be that once we get to the new Earth or fifth dimensional service mind thinking, that there would be less instances of negative entities because the collective unconscious as a whole would be at a higher vibration?
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that they're not going to exist at all. There'll be so much space, get this right. There'll be so much space between a person who is in a service to others mentality, a group, a whole race, a whole planet of people. There'll be so much space that it's like that dimension of the low vibrating negative entities, it's like this. It's like it's too different right now.
Huh.
Yeah, like right now in our kind of like in the long-term history of the world, we're in an epic or a period of time that is characterized in anthroposophy of the conflict between materialism and spiritual life. The conflict between like the negative vibration, the low contraction, service to self, blah, 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 and the spiritual life. So all of this, as we're rising, it's kind of still clashing. It's still going to for a long time. So our task is to become aware of it. You know,
Mm.
there's a lot of people who aren't even aware that this is going on.
Right.
So right now, our task is to be aware of it in our own life. And as each person starts to wake up and be aware of this conflict between materialism and spiritual life, then always that Christ consciousness, that evolution, that's always going to rise at the end of the day. And so, yeah, there is still going to be that realm. There is still going to be those things, but it's going to attach itself to a reality of beings. And I don't know what it's going to look like, but that is closer match. And then the people in the more like, 5D reality, we're going to be working with things that are in a closer match. So a bifurcation of sorts that has already started to take place will just continue.
Since they live in a different dimension, how do they see our dimension? Do they have like a distorted view of what's going on? And also, how do they see humans? Do they look at us as hosts because they're parasites? Or what is that like?
Yeah. First off, it's important that we don't give them too much credit. And so, I think part of, again, like the church and the Hollywood and all this, like there's so much scare and shock, and they don't have the same consciousness as we do. So it's not like they're seeing our realm and like thinking about it like, that looks like a good person and this is how I'm going to bother it. It's not it's not a process in the way that we would have a process. So
Okay.
if you think about it a little bit more like a germ or a parasite that is not having really a thought process, it's just going where it can feed. It's just naturally attracted to where it goes, like, I'm hungry. And in a small way, I guess, an energy vampire person kind of does the same thing. They definitely are a little more calculated because they're a human, but they're more just attracted to like the easiest person to feed energy off of or to complain to or to manipulate. They're not sitting looking through their list like, you know what I mean? It's more like a natural reaction. So if we
Yeah.
think of these things as just more like opportunists that way, seeing us as something to attach to, something that has a lot of life force. Again, back to the parasite thing, a parasite is living off somebody else's life force. A fungus is living off of a tree, It's not like we're making them, oh, this is so evil, this is so bad. It's just kind of like a chain of reality. They are unresourced within themselves, not connected to source light, disconnected. And again, like if you understand an energy vampire, you're already 99% understanding all this. They don't take accountability in the same way like a parasite doesn't take accountability. So they don't like feel bad. There's not like a feeling of the heart. They don't have a heart. So they will act superior to intimidate, as in, a lot of people's experience with the fourth dimension. They might bully or criticize or try to use scare tactics, but it doesn't mean that you can be harmed. Your biggest harm with these kind of things is, again, succumbing to a rabbit hole of fear, and just kind of uses up everything it can, kind of like a buffet, kind of like a parasite again. And so, yeah, it's kind of like there's not a lot of like a thought process, and so they would kind of just like see us as energy, really, more than anything.
Okay. All right. And they would see us as energy that is similar to theirs, or certain people that is similar to theirs, because those are the type of people that they are attracted to. They're
That's
like,
right.
oh, this person's energy is similar to me. I'm going to go but they unconsciously do it.
Yeah. And that person's energy is a close enough match, but they're a little more connected than me. Yeah.
Okay.
So
All right.
it's like they've got something that maybe their peer or the other parasite nearby doesn't have, there's a little more, but they're not so empowered that it would be dangerous to go near. So yeah, just a step
All
above.
right. So, with all of this, you have had tons of experience with negative entities and dreams also in which you experience negative entities. But so, what is your view of evil in general? Because negative entities are often referred to as evil entities.
Yeah, to answer this question about evil, I want to again bring it back to the age we're in. In Eastern mysticism, it's called the Kali Yuga. In Western mysticism, there are other names for the cycles of time. But I think most mystics agree that we're at a period of a long, thousands of years long period of time in history where it's very much focused on materialism, separation from our spiritual aspects. It's characterized by like a trend towards like a material only reality. Most people don't even believe in the soul or spirit. We literalize the holy texts. We don't see them as like symbolic and living. There's just so much going on. So when we're in a low cycle of time, like the Kali Yuga, where we're very separated from source, we're not actually, but our experience is, um, the result is going to be what we would call evil, survival. And so in the Mahabharata, I think it is Mahabharata. Yeah, Arjuna says, I do not see any creature that lives without injuring others. One person becomes the victim of another. A snake eats the frog eats the fly. This is the reality of the Kali Yuga. So the evil and the suffering are more just like an unconscious forgetting and separation. And we basically are just doing what we can to survive because of our separation from source that results in really harmful stuff to other people because it is more like a service to self. The Kali Yuga would be like a service to self. Again, we are coming out of it, but we're still very much in it. And we're in that kind of like duality, like spirit is here, materialism is here. It's not quite integrated. And when we're, even though there's like a non-dual, there's levels of reality that is non-dual, our current experience is duality. And so those actions do cause suffering and then cause the person who gets hurt would definitely call it evil. And an unconscious person that's causing the hurt wouldn't probably call it evil. They would somehow justify it or not even think about it. So I would say that evil is like literally forgetting home, falling far from the heart vibration, and just not even believing that goodness exists, not believing that higher power, God, love is even real. Evil is literally the result of that. And it's a far fall.
Okay. So then, if that's your perspective of evil, then how do you see the devil? Is there some sort of hierarchy to these negative entities where the devil is this leader?
Yeah, this is another loaded question, so bear with me. So in the Bible, it's not super clear that is, one text that a lot of people pull the word devil from or the idea of a devil. In the Bible also, there is a verse, it's in Ephesians, and it's calling the devil or Satan the prince of the power of the air. Prince of the power of the air. A lot of people don't really understand what that means. This is another example of really taking symbols and words from the Bible and really taking them beyond literal. Like, it's not like the devil is flying around the air around my head. That's not what that word. With the 4 elements, earth, water, fire, air, air is related to the mind. It's related to the intellect. And so the forces of evil, they have to go through the mind, because when we think thoughts, we create, like we talked about the astral realm. When we think strategy and plans that are against another people, we're literally kind of like using the essence, the qualities, the powers of a force that many people call the devil. The devil can be, in some people's seeing ability, can be personified. and maybe take a form, but what they're experiencing is the force of the devil, the force of evil, and then their mind creates that image. So if I said, oh, the devil looks like he's got horns and a pitchfork, and I'm just experiencing a force, I'm kind of taking it in. You might be taking in the same force, but you'd be seeing something differently. So trying to forget like what it could look like, or giving it a personality or any of that stuff, and we're seeing it as like a very, very powerful force. In anthroposophy, it's broken down even further. So the devil, what we would know as Satan, that being has a lot to do with, again, materialism, decadence, rejecting any goodness, being like almost like a hindrance. It's like a force of being a hindrance to anything good. That force tries to convince people that there is no higher power, there is no spiritual world, that you have no God inside, you have no self-empowerment, and in fact, you need more powerful people, you need machine technology, you need to buy something, you need to consume things, and spend lots of money, and always be looking for empowerment outside of yourself because there's no God inside. So that kind of part of the spectrum of the devil would be called Satan, or the classic devil in anthroposophy, it's called Ahriman. And then kind of like on another end of it, we know the being of Lucifer. We hear the word Lucifer, and it's sometimes used interchangeably, but actually the force in the astral realms, the force of Lucifer, it's also working, but it works differently. And what it does, it tries to trick people into total freedom, total individualism, not caring about other people, not caring about the body, not caring about the earth, being so invested in afterlife that this life doesn't matter. There's nothing that can be learned. Escapism. We see this even in the Christian church, because I don't know about you, but there's a lot of Christian church culture where people are focused on heaven, but they're not taking good care of their body. They don't care about the earth. There's no value in this experience here. It's not a holy experience. They're just like, sitting around waiting to go back to God. We see it in the New Age, this kind of force of the devil in the form of Lucifer, where people just, it's all love and light. It's all flowers and unicorns. It's all non-duality. There's no evil, blah, 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 blah. And that's a really dangerous way to be with kind of like the Lucifer force, because then we're not taking responsibility for the trouble we cause or the negative thought forms that we're doing unconsciously. So yes, the devil is real, but not in more like a cartoony character that many people think of. It's literally forces that are at work in our reality right now. And these are forces that we have to contend with. They kind of work together, even though they have different aspects. And the only thing that can really work to kind of elevate us out of those forces completely taking over is the Christ force, is the heart center. And again, not having like a little man named Jesus in your heart, but connecting with that Christ consciousness that is constantly up leveling the universe, opening people's hearts, bringing creative energy in, and sacrificing, like literally, like, sacrificing your selfish desires for the greater good. And so when we're working with that, those kind of like devil forces, Ahriman, Lucifer, they're there, but we can see the devil force as more of a like a stepping stone. Like, yeah, it's a hindrance. Yeah, it can really cause a lot of trouble, but we're using it as like an initiatory force where we have something to move ahead of. Always those forces are kind of like lagging behind. And yeah, they're always trying to hinder us, but it challenges us. How can I move and open my heart and move with the Christ force?
So are they actually spirits or are they thought forms like you talked about earlier?
Yeah, I would say the best word would be like a universal force. Not like a
Okay.
spirit that just hops around or like attaches onto somebody. No, not like that. It's literally a force that is around us all the time. Kind of like back to what the Bible said, um, the prince of the spirit of the air. So it's kind of like a governing force that we are moving through as humans on earth in this universe.
We've been talking about Lucifer and the devil and Christ consciousness. So, with all of that, what is your perspective of the Bible and Christianity?
Yeah, that's great. So much there. There's so much there. Um, there is a lot in the Bible that is code, that's hidden, that most people don't understand. And unfortunately, because we're in this time of contraction and materialization, the Bible has been in the hands of people who don't understand its secrets, its codes, and its qualities. I'm not somebody who's a huge student of those things, but the little things that I do know and that have kind of been revealed through different teachers or through my own intuition have been life changing. So, the Bible as it is, with most of the teachers that are pastors, ministers, or whatever, they're teaching from a really materialist sense. For example, like the stories about Jesus and the apostles and the disciples and stuff, it's all about, okay, this happened and then they went here and then this happened and this miracle. And it's difficult because the stories, they definitely hold, almost like on a kindergarten level, they hold a lot of great lessons in many ways. But on a higher perspective, we for back to that verse about the prince of the power of the air, they can get totally demolished where people think that there's devils flying around the air around them. There's so many harmful things that have been done because people take stories from the Bible and then try and replicate them for today's day and age. So then you've got kids thinking devils are flying around their head, or stories from the Old Testament. There's so many rites and practices where it's like, okay, well, when a woman is bleeding, she has to go do this. She's dirty, or all kinds of these things that have shamed. When that gets momentum, and it has, in many cultures. Think of all the women that have been shamed and the taboo and the stigma about their period based on these verses. So, my opinion about it is that there are esoteric meanings behind a lot of parts of the Bible that, when they are understood and when they are actually implemented in people's lives, can be really empowering. But in the wrong hands and the materialist teachings, they can be very destructive.
Hmm.
A more empowering example would be animal sacrifice. So in the Old Testament, we're learning about animal sacrifice. And it's not a pretty sight. It's like you're killing animals and sacrifice them to some god, you know? But in esoterica, like the actual meaning of animal sacrifice is we're sacrificing our lower nature, our animal impulses that are addiction and force and sexual gratification at all costs. And these are our animal natures, and we sacrifice them on the path of Christ consciousness. We put them aside to to go after higher ideals. So
Hmm.
there's just so much valuable information, but when you find the right teachers, because otherwise it can be extremely destructive. That is kind of what comes to mind immediately. And I think that's going to change in the future. I think many amazing teachers are coming forward and they're able to kind of extract higher meanings and higher ideals from all these symbols that we have taken very literally. So it's going to change. I think we've been through the worst.
Do you think that, as it is written in the Bible, that Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice for humanity and he was, the Lamb of God and he is the Son of God? What is your perspective on that?
My perspective on that is that, again, these are going back to taking symbolic terms and making them literally. So Jesus said many things that a lot of preachers don't talk about. He said, ye are gods. He said, ye are
Hmm.
gods. There are no sermons on that. There are very few evangelical books written about that. Um, Jesus, Jesus was in many mystery traditions, he's known as the holder, the vessel of the Christ consciousness that was able to carry more of the Christ consciousness based on his personal work over many lifetimes, many reincarnations. Many people believe that he had been on the planet many times, like being an incredible teacher, an incredible initiate, all of these servant, like all of this learning that he had done. By the time he came back as Jesus, he was ready to be a person that really changed the face of the earth forever. And there's a lot of mysteries around it, but one thing that is known in is becoming more known in mystery schools is that, okay, we're all sons and daughters of God. We're all part of God, first of all. But he was one that was able to, for a period of his life, for 3 years, take on the Christ consciousness to such a high degree that the actual energetic signature, the actual etheric plane, kind of like the invisible plane that's all around us, was altered. So before his incarnation, before his ministry, before his death, humans were more looking outwards. They were looking to teachers. They were looking to learn things outside of themselves, but going inward and contemplating on the heart and experiencing God inside, that really wasn't a thing. It was all about the outward sacrifices and rituals. When Christ came, he had developed himself, Jesus the Christ, he had developed himself to such a point that he was experiencing God inside. He was connecting with, I guess it was the Garden of Gethsemane where he was connecting with ancestors like Elijah appeared. He was he was able to do that. His sacrifice, he did make a sacrifice. He did a ritual, a death ritual where, yes, he died and his glorified etheric body, his kind of translucent body was appearing to people after. So since his blood was spilt on the earth, physical blood, yes, but his etheric blood, because our blood contains, beyond like the red plasma and stuff, there is like a magic, there's like information in all of our blood based on our lifetimes. So this etheric body that we have goes with us from lifetime to lifetime, body to body. The information and the sacrifice and the initiation that was contained in his etheric blood that spilt on the ground changed the energetic body of the earth forever. So after he came and did what he did with the degree of Christ consciousness in him, now all people, no matter what country you're from, no matter what your history is, if they are on the path and they seriously want to connect in that way, they have access to that information, to that possibility, to that potential of initiating themselves because of what he left and did himself, because of that level of Christ consciousness. Again, Christianity, churchianity can really dogmatize this and, oh, it's Jesus, we just got to worship Jesus. Jesus wasn't asking anyone to worship him. People just decided to do that. He was asking people to follow him, to become like him. And he made such a life and a death to try and open the door for other people to experience the magical things that he experienced. And he said, one day you'll do more than even I did. So those are my thoughts on a few of my thoughts on the being of Jesus.
It's complete 180 from what Christians hear growing up and what you grow up hearing about in church on Sunday school. So how can our dreams be a way that we can let go of attachments? And do you have any experiences with dreams and letting go of maybe negative entities?
Yeah, so people who dream, well, we all dream, but people who remember their dreams, this is who who can really benefit from their night. I call it the night school. One of my teachers called it the night school.
I love that.
Many people, and it's going to only increase. Many people are remembering their dreams. They're interacting in their dreams more than they used to. They're feeling emotions in their dreams. They are seeing symbols, things in the dreams that they can look up online and find out, what's the dream meaning of this symbol or this thing that I saw, and they can learn and then they can change and integrate. So just if a person's first, let's go backwards. If a person's not remembering their dreams but wants to, there are some little things that have worked for me. Mugwort tea, like the herbal shop. It's not a dramatic. It doesn't work for everyone, and it's not super dramatic. But drinking mugwort tea, putting a little bit of a mugwort tea pillow under your pillow, you're kind of putting out the intention, because mugwort is known for dreaming. You're putting out the intention to the universe. I want to dream. I want to remember my dreams. Help me. So that's one way of doing it. And again, like keeping a notebook or a journal, pen and paper beside your bed so that you can record even a little bit, because the moment that you want to focus on is when you first wake up in the morning, when you're kind of between asleep and awake. Don't get out of bed too fast. Don't hop and check on your phone. What works the best is when you first wake up, not moving. Don't toss and turn. I can't tell you how many times I've remembered a dream a bit and then I've just kind of like flipped to my other side and it's gone. So stay super still, super relaxed, close your eye again and just ask yourself, okay, what can I remember about where I just was? Usually the dreams that we have just before waking up, and I'm not an expert on sleep cycles and rhythms, but the type of dreams that we have just before waking up in the morning are the most meaningful, and we go to a very deep place inside of ourselves. So yeah, keep your journal, get some mugwort tea if you're wanting to dream more. People who do dream, people who do remember their dreams, to take it very seriously. It's a very sacred thing to be able to remember your dreams. A lot of people that I talk to, they want to and they can't. There's a block there for some reason. And kind of like offside marijuana, regular marijuana use can really block dreams, and it can take people a long time to get them back. So that's not everyone, but it's for a lot of marijuana use. The marijuana is like a denser or a heavy kind of film. Yeah, that's how it works psychically. So also dreaming on the full moon and a woman on her menstrual cycle, those are really good times to really try and pay attention and put out your intention to dream, because the veils are thinner. The veils are thinner. The dream world is a bit of everything. Our soul, our spirit guides, we are guided to dream experiences or dream realms in the astral that are the most meaningful for us at a given specific time. We shouldn't ever have any shame about having a series of chaotic or difficult dreams. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with us. If anything, it means that your soul is in the night school, cleaning up, clearing up, rebalancing something that's not obvious to you in the daytime. A person whose consciousness and mindfulness in the daytime is really high, if you're someone who meditates or you're just really good at being mindful throughout the day, you're going to remember your dreams better, because a person in mindfulness or in a more calm state is kind of like a match for kind of like the sleep state. So that's one other thing, is to be super mindful and meditate when you can, as often as you can, to kind of like be in the dream. So chaotic dreams are not a bad reflection of you at all, although they can be disturbing. There's something to be very curious about. There's something to definitely look up any symbols that you see in those dreams that can give you clues towards what your soul is trying to tell us, because our soul doesn't speak to us usually in words. People who have spirit guides, visit angels, usually words are not used. It's often like sensations and feelings matched with symbols. So when we start to understand symbols, we can really understand the universe and we can understand our dreams so much better. And healing, yeah. We can heal things that we are blocked to in day-to-day life in our dreams. Again, it's up to our soul, because unless you're a good lucid dreamer, you're not going to be controlling your dreams. But one example I can give you, and this kind of goes in with like the dark forces. I had a dream about 3 months ago, and I was going through there's a personal time where I was getting a lot of like I would say difficult dreams. Uh, I was a bit ungrounded, but it wasn't a bad thing. It was just like kind of like a rite of passage of my own. And one of my dreams, it was all dark, it was all black. It felt frightening in my dream. And there was this kind of force. It didn't have a face, it didn't seem like bad or good. It was almost like a cloud or yeah, a little tornado or something like that. And it was pushing against me in the dream, and I could feel it, like there was a sensation in my body, and I was kind of pushing back, and then it would push at me a bit more. It didn't hurt, but it was almost like a strong wind. So I would push back with all my might, and it was less about my physical force in the dream. It was more about my will to stand strong and to not get blown over by this little tornado wind. But it had a consciousness. It was some kind of a spirit. And I woke up and I was like, whew, that was intense. Whew, that was scary. Oh my God. But after kind of integrating, like I'm not calling that an evil spirit or a bad entity or anything like that. Sometimes when we're doing spiritual development work, we're tested. We're tested for our strength. You wouldn't call a tornado bad or good. You would call it a tornado, you know? And
True.
is your house strong enough to not fall over when it comes
True.
through? So it's important in spiritual development not to polarize things always into good or bad, but
Mm,
is this an initiating entity? Is this an initiating force that's developing my resilience and my courage and my self-love in some way to move me on to the next level of me? And when it comes to negative entities and evil entities, that's why I'm not always like on the bandwagon of like, let's run away or cast it out or blah, 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 blah. Because often these forces are actually like when I look back over my own life so far, they've all been initiating entities of my own courage, of my own ability to get resourced quicker and quicker every time. So in the dream, yeah, I would say this was a test. And in a way, it was a bit of a healing. It was me reconnecting with part of my courage that maybe I wouldn't normally have. I've had a few dreams like that over the years. They have a very similar quality. And each time I'm quicker to, stand strong, to like be sovereign, to be grounded, even within the dream state. At first, I wasn't at all. And it should always have a bit of an element of surprise or shock or emotion when we're having healing dreams, because sometimes we're releasing something, we're sometimes purging energy, sometimes we're letting go of something that no longer serves us in the dream. And you'll know that that happened because when you wake up, even if you only remember a bit of the dream, you're going to feel lighter. You're going to
yeah.
kind of feel like a bit of a glow or a relief or a little bit more of you and less of the density. So just to really trust that your soul knows the way. And then if you're doing your part by opening yourself up to wanting to dream more and you're doing what you can to intend it, then the soul's going to bring you through dream experiences that are absolutely perfect for you, to not judge your dream experiences, but to be really curious and to get as familiar as you can with any of the symbols that you see in the dream.
Do we go someplace when we dream? I've heard that, when you have good dreams, maybe you travel through your crown chakra, and then when you have bad dreams, you go through your root chakra. Is there truth to that?
That's a good question. I've never heard that, although there could be definitely truth to it. Uh, in the bad dreams, we're generally hitting the fourth dimension.
Okay.
We're generally we're dealing with something in the fourth dimension. When we have kind of like good dreams, just or just like day-to-day life dreams, that can just kind of be like a mirror reality. It can be like the middle world. And then when we have dreams that involve, spirit guides, angels, teachings, healing, those are higher dimensions. Those are going to be higher dimensions.
Okay.
Yeah, and just kind of like a side note with that, there are lots of people who connect with spirit guides or angels or whatever in their dreams, but they're not necessarily what they say they are. So I just want to say a word on the what is called the false light. The false light in the New Age is a term given to when you're having a dream or a meditation and you're connecting with a spirit guide, a being that looks, maybe visually looks like an angel or looks like a good spirit guide. We need to learn discernment. So if you're opening yourself up to that, to learn how to feel in that moment, how does this being make me feel? Do I feel safe? Do I feel supported? Do I feel like this being wants me to be a better version of me? Are they rooting for me? Or are they trying to control me? Are they acting superior to me? Are they wanting me to, are they only interested in me in order to channel some kind of message to humanity? Are they robotic? And when a person is becoming more open, part of our initiation is to learn discerning these beings. That's just the way it is. We are generally going to fail a few times. There's a lot of people in the new age of channeling that are still failing over and over, haven't learned the difference. But the best way to learn discernment is to feel in regular life. So if you're not blocking your feelings and you're feeling them fully and your heart center is open to like the pain and the love and everything, when you find yourself in an altered reality with beings, you're going to feel there too. And so if you feel that a being is flat, neutral, robotic, mechanical, kind of like 2D, that's a false light being. It's the fourth dimension. It's nothing to be afraid of or worried about. It's something to recognize. And then in contrast, you'll probably come across beings that are of an elevated nature, and it's soul warmth you're going to feel. You're going to feel soul warmth when you're in the presence of those beings. You might even become emotional. You might wake up crying or in tears. And even if they don't give you a message or anything like that, the remembrance of their vibration and their emanation is enough to change you. It's enough to elevate you, just interfacing. And it's the same if, when you meet a person who's really open hearted and wants the best for you and is powerful, you leave differently. You leave with a little bit of that emanation. So that's really important to learn discernment and to be okay with making mistakes along the way. Part of it. Yeah.
Okay, wow. This has been really empowering. I feel like you are kind of negating all of these myths or beliefs that we have been taught, these limiting beliefs that, we have something to be scared of. And entities are out there to hurt us, and we need to run away from them. But you're really like, this is a message of empowerment and saying that no, we can use them for a catalyst for spiritual growth. And we can use them to heal, actually, because they're actually just us. They're emanations of us. They're attracted to the parts of ourselves that need healing. So we can actually use them to heal and not be afraid of them, because they're not going to hurt us.
Totally. Oh, there's one more thing. Hold on a sec.
Okay.
What you just said reminded me of something I wrote down. They mirror back to us our lack of sovereignty, our lack of personal responsibility, our lack of good judgment, our lack of discernment, or just undeveloped discernment. They show us that when we abandon ourselves and we don't honor and respect ourselves, they can come in to that vacuum that is created. Yeah.
Thank you so much for allowing me to ask all of these questions about negative entities, and also thank you for helping me see them in a new light, and the people watching, I'm sure.
Yeah, my pleasure.